How is it possible that we're constantly viewing articles about American foreign policy in the Middle East, and hardly ever does anyone say it's Israel pulling the strings? And it really, really is. And what's worse, I would say we're in gangster land. So normal parameters aren't necessarily appropriate when discussing that.
I think it's to answer it honestly, it's a number of things, right, that are related. Some are not related. I mean, look, I think there is a lot of Americans were raised on this belief that America is like the most powerful country in the world, and it creates its own foreign policy, and that it's just so powerful and economically and militarily that it makes its own policy, and so it's unthinkable that you would have a little tiny state like Israel that would be able to influence or control U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East to the extent that it does. So it's a difficult concept. I think it's conceptually difficult, and then it also, I mean, even if you weren't raised on American propaganda of American power, it would just looking at the U.S. and looking at Israel, it would seem that that it's the U.S. that controls Israel, or that Israel is a satellite of the U.S. I think it just appears that way. Yep. And then I think also then when you get into the more, I think those are honest impressions that people get. But I think at the level of like the New York Times editorial board, the people who write the op-eds and the things that they publish, that's contrived. That's intentional. I mean, there's definitely a editorial policy. I mean, look, papers have what are called editorial policies. It's not just like they have an editorial line. It's not just like everyone who wants to publish can submit and will publish, but they have like their favorite writers. Why are they favorite? Because they say the things that they want them to say, or that they know that they're going to say the things that they like. So
yeah,
and
I
then
mean, yeah. I mean, you're saying they know better than what they're actually printing and writing. They actually do know the truth.
Well, they may know. Yeah,
America.
Some know the truth, and some are also just self-deluded. I mean, self-delusion or delusion can go very far, and you can be very misinformed on the subject, and then I think obviously at the very top they know, but you could even have a chief editor who's just, I don't know, has a good personality or is very effective or very obedient or a very good editor, technically speaking, and they just may be very ignorant, but they are committed to just publishing the view that that the United States policy is driven by folly. That's really the biggest thing that gets promoted, is that the U.S. policy is just an accident, that it's mistake after mistake, or that they're after the resources, but that they failed. And we always talk about the failure of the Iraq War. They always talk about the failure of U.S. policy,
Well, you touched on something I'd like to mention, because the failure of the Iraq War, of the intervening in Somalia, of Libya, we have to ask if these were not the intentions that the Israeli controllers wanted these to be failed states, that they're happy if the people are left to emigrate as refugees and the state institutions have collapsed.
I think it's a big part of it. I look at Israel. I look at it through two lenses with U.S. foreign policy, basically an idealist lens and a realist lens, and these are kind of large parent schools in international relations. What I found, to sort of cut to the chase, is that the U.S.'s policy on the Middle East does not fit any conventional model outside of really dependency theory. And this is actually itself quite unusual, because normally in dependency theory, if a country does not have its own foreign policy, it only occurs in the case that it is a colony or a protectorate or a neo-colony or an imperialist theory of another more powerful hegemon. People often think of the U.S. in the Middle East as a hegemon because in classical international relations theory, there are certain underlying assumptions that states are sovereign, that a country that has a military has a government that makes its own decisions. In dependency theory, within IR, we can allow that a country controls another country. So, for example, the U.S. Might be a hegemon, and maybe it can get the government of the Philippines to take action, or they can get the government of Japan, because the U.S. has a lot of influence over Japan, to take action against another country. So in that case, we would say, well, Japan doesn't have full sovereign control, and so they can act against their own interests because they're subjugated. So what's interesting is that in the Middle East, there's really not an angle that explains what the U.S. is doing. There's no reason from the perspective of energy markets, because people often talk about oil being the main thing. It's really not that logical, because they very easily could have made a deal with Iran much earlier, and they didn't have to overthrow the government in Egypt, and they didn't really have to have a bad relationship with Syria. I mean, all of these things they could have worked out. I mean, if you were to look at the cost of what they spent, and of course it was taxpayers who did that spending, we can look and say, yeah, at the short term that helped the military-industrial complex, and that trough got fed from and so forth. But really, when a country has national planners, or they have a long-term strategy, of course they have to feed different mouths, but they don't do it at the expense of the sovereignty or the stability of the whole plan long term, right? So, it really didn't make a lot of sense. But when you look at what they spent, say, on Iraq, they could have just actually made a very much bigger or better deal with Saddam. If they were willing to spend that much to get a discount, basically a discount on the oil, nothing's free. You still got to extract it. I mean, you can have slaves and you still got to feed the slaves, right? So I mean, there's a cost no matter what. It's not free oil. So
it's just all loss making. None of it makes sense. We're given the spin that it's for money, because I think it's part of the social indoctrination that we have to be very materialistic.
Right.
And I'm getting into a subtle area there.
No, it's apt.
Well, I'm glad to hear it's apt, but we're indoctrinated to think every action is for material gain. We're encouraged to be selfish ourselves. There's something very sophisticated going on.
Right.
But, in plain man's language, you've got a criminal syndicate running the whole show. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. And I don't really like people leaving comments saying that, to be honest with you, but it's true. It's absolutely true. And they don't heed legal formalities. They don't like it when a resolution's passed against them, but they don't factor that in when they're making their decisions. No, hubris is right.
It is. But there is, we live in a physical reality, and there are some elements to how this works. The hubris can be there. They can have an intent to disregard the law, but there's a reason that lawyers do so well in the world. I mean, you can't just go in gangbusters all the time. You have to win in courts, and you have to win opinions, and you have to frame things the right way. Even Dracula has to get invited in by the host, right? So it's
I mean, if you look at Wall Street and the banking and the insurance companies, there's not one of them that could act independently of Israel, nor the Fed. So the rest is academic. I mean, if you've got to pay a lot of lawyers to keep things intact, then so be it. But I think,
well, I specifically did not look at anything relating to the Fed or American foreign policy in general. I'm specifically looking at U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. Let me just put it like this. Look, one can make the argument that American foreign policy in American interests is against Russia and China, and one can rationalize that. Okay, one can say from the language of IR, either in a realist or idealist theory that's coherent, that's rational, one can make the argument that the U.S. has legitimate reasons to have a competition with Russia or China in the Great Game. That does not apply to the Middle East. It does not apply to the Middle East. This is purely Israel's plan. So I did not speak. I'm not saying that Israel does not, or that Zionists do not have a lot of control or total control. It's just out of the scope of what I looked at in this piece. And what I looked at was the Annan plan, which is a popular way of talking about the plan for Greater Israel. And then I talked about the neocons who later submitted basically a paper called Clean Break that they submitted to Netanyahu, which basically urged for a complete break with the philosophy of the Oslo Accords, which was about the establishment of a two-state solution. And they didn't just want to get rid of this idea of Palestine, but it was about a complete regional hegemonic domination of the Middle East. This relies upon the destruction of Iraq, the destruction of Syria, and it relies upon breaking Iran up into 5 or 6 smaller, weaker states that could be controlled by a single large Israel that's, between the area of Egypt and the border of Iran today. So quite a large Israel that basically gets rid of much of Syria and all of Iraq.
There's too many similarities between the colonization of Palestine, which we call Israel, and the colonization of the United States and Australia and New Zealand. I mean, these are all wars against indigenous people. They're all enacted with mass immigrations of people with multiple ethnicities. And I can't believe it's a human instinct or natural human actions, and B, I can't think it's random or just a coincidence.
That's what that makes me think of is the Hasbara trolls. One of the arguments, people who know what this is, do you want to tell them, or are the people who basically spend a lot of time who are Israelis that pretend to be Americans, or they're Zionists who are in America and they write in English and they do a lot of message board contribution, or they'll write like in a comment section of the New York.
You froze. I can't.
Right when I was saying that.
Yeah. Oh, but you've come back. Well, let me just add before you resume. It's not only Hasbara from Israel, although Israel might have been first, but the Cameron government in Britain has just employed 1,500 people to just write comments in social media. So you're talking about very much the same thing.
Yes, it's that. Yeah, I mean, the Hasbara was the kind of the model that established the mold, and it does sway public opinion. It works. They wouldn't do it if it didn't work, right?
Yeah.
But one of the things that they used to say a lot to Americans, and they would appeal to the same thing, and this relates to indigenous people. They would say, America should support, what Israel is doing to Palestine is no different than what the U.S. did to Native Americans and Mexicans, after the 1840s. And that's legit, right? So if America did it, then so should Israel. I mean, I think it's all, not good. And look, it happened. How does one judge the past? I mean, it happened.
Well, you can't undo the past. It doesn't make it
undo the
right,
past,
but it doesn't make it right. We're in agreement. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah. Right. I'm not a time traveler, though. It's easy to oppose it. I mean, what action does that force me to make? I mean, I oppose this history book. I mean, one has to oppose the real existing social relations today. One has to act consciously against them today to make a difference today. There's a lot of people who think that having the right opinions about the past makes them a good person, but it's actually what you do today that matters, And, I think people can have the wrong opinions about the past, but make the right actions in the present.
Well,
that's
look,
the other twist.
Picking up on the point you just made, I mean, is it possible there's an oligarchy? Is it possible there's a syndicate, a mafia, that, and it's the same people that did colonize America and encourage it that are colonizing Palestine? Is that a feasible possibility?
It's feasible. One thing is that power changes hands relatively quickly, and in terms of one generation to the next. I mean, you're not talking about an individual. So now you're talking about, I'm a guy, I have a mission, I had kids or I recruited people, and I'm gonna like indoctrinate them that this
Well,
is the
no. I mean, for all we know, it could be religious Jews. They're actually blamed a lot for the slave trade, and they've been a clan for quite a while.
It is, yes, it is that Jewish people who were involved in finance and the slave trade were very much involved in the.
So what I'm saying is the colonization of America, Australia, New Zealand, and all the Americas, I guess, could they have been orchestrated by the same group of people that are orchestrating the colonization in the Middle East?
You know what? I guess it's the word orchestrating that adds a dimension. Language is very strange. It's very nuanced. I mean, look, we can say, we don't have to say, but the thing is that I think I would say more than that. I mean, look, you can look at the history of the Anglo-Dutch charter system, the Dutch charters and the English charters going back to the Dutch East Indies Corporation, or to the various charter companies that the English Crown established. That people don't always get into the history of, and some people are champions of free markets and they're against government regulation, but they don't understand that corporations are private entities that get the blessing of government to do their own dirt in the interest of the realm. And this sort of breakdown between the meaningful distinction between public and private. And the charter system and what are called privateers, which over time we call pirates or pirateers. Pirates are basically what the British were famous for, and they did this in the West Indies and the Caribbean. They were involved in bootlegging and in running rum, the famous Caribbean rum, alcohol, which destroys people, destroys lives, alcohol, which destroys indigenous communities. They imported and created rum from sugarcane and back and forth.
And the opium trade.
And they did opium trade from Afghanistan. Well, basically, wherever the British were, and I'm not talking about some working class blokes from Liverpool or whatnot. I'm talking about the ruling class of England, which has long time connections with Jews. And I don't think there's some mystical, or there's no anti-Semitic conspiracy. There's no Semitic conspiracy. It's just that you have ideology. It could have we could be on a different planet and we could be describing the same thing and use different words. What's most important is not to villainize people or to other them. All the potential to do bad is within me, it's within you. It's not like there's some special group that's uniquely capable of doing bad. What is unique in this historical instance is that it is the Judaism of elite Jews, of very religious Jews and secular Jews who carry on this elitism, is that it is an elitist ideology that Gentiles are not human beings, and that one is doing God's providence, that one is doing God's work in employing Gentiles as slaves. That is the fundamental problem that emerged, and I think it's a human crisis. There's nothing genetically about Jewish people that makes them more susceptible to this. And a person can become a Jew effectively if they embrace this. And there's many later permutations of the same belief system, whether it's the twists on Freemasonry or the twists on Illuminati, or all these sort of strange esoteric terms that get thrown around. I try to distance myself from them because I think that they obfuscate or they mystify things that are real existing social relations and relations of production that can be explained without using terms that make us think about, reptilians and shit like that, quite frankly. So, yeah, I try to keep it real, and I try to keep the human dimension here. I think it's so difficult to talk about this subject I think one of the great things about Islam and Christianity, as they are also Abrahamic faiths, and I can sympathize with people who have a bad reaction to Abrahamic faiths in general. I'm not a bigot at all. But I think that one of the things about both of these faiths is that they are universal, and they say that all human beings are spiritually equal, that we are all fundamentally human, that we, and that in God's eyes or in the eyes of the universe or what have you, that we're all have this fundamental right to the same quest, that we have a right not to be slaves to each other, that we cannot spiritually or materially oppress each other. This is very different from Judaism, and I think that it's legitimate I think that when you have these sort of elitist or capitalistic type of elements built into a religion, Puritanism is not free from this. Puritanism, which is a branch of Christianity, very much takes from the same Judaic concept. It's very problematic for the same reason. So, and I'm not as familiar about any variations that might exist in Islam, because I'm not from an Islamic society. I know very well Christian civilization because I'm from one, and so I don't. It's not exclusive to Jews, but it is. But I think that when Christianity first came out, it was definitely a response to this Jewish practice. I mean, that's clear when you look at the Bible. I'm not a Bible thumper. My faith is my business. But when one actually reads the life story of, this Jesus character and his life works and the things that they were working on and working against, it very much deals with this Jewish power elite, the corruption of the religion, and the monetization of people's lives. That's what they were against. So, that's to me the very interesting twist about that. I just, I get. I know people, okay? I'm a people person, Morris, and I get people, and it's just too easy for people to want to blame other people. And I'm not saying that the average Joe on the street is responsible for, the worst things in history, but it's too easy to it's too easy not to improve yourself or to not think that we're all capable of doing these things. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. Listen, you've raised a lot of questions. We've had a good conversation. I'll put a link into your article. We maybe didn't really discuss the article so much, but we've covered a lot to think about.
Yeah, no, thanks. I appreciate it. I guess just on the article, a concluding thought, if I could, would just be, it's a good article if you don't want to be hit over the head with polemics or it's not an opinion piece. It's pretty cold analytically. I just look at American foreign policy in the Middle East. I determine that it's not rational. I look at whose interest it's in. I look at cui bono. It's Israel is who benefits. And then I look at who has the mechanism to control U.S. policy in the Middle East. And I look at IPAC and I look at the neocons and I say, look, this is the policy that works for Israel. Israel had the ability to control American policy in the Middle East. Ergo, the most rational assumption, given that it's not in the U.S.'s interest per se, is that it's Israel's policy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, when the American Air Force, what was it? No, it was the Israeli Air Force was bombing Liberty, the USS Liberty, that U.S. ship in the Mediterranean, spy ship. Mm-hmm. They called the U.S. Air Force to go and rescue the ship. And Lyndon Johnson said no, stopped the American Air Force defending an American ship while Israel was attacking it. As far as I know, that's what happened. And
I think that's right.
And yeah. I think nothing has changed.
It would make sense that it went down that way because Lyndon Johnson would not be president if it was not for some of the tinkerings of the Israelis and the Mossad. So.
Okay, well, thank you. I guess JFK was a victim of all.
I thought we knew that one, right? No, yeah, I think that one's been established. I'm not a perfect guy. don't agree with every social policy or foreign policy position, but he definitely his junta and his posse didn't want to be tangled up with the Mossad and Israel, and he let that be known. And he had some different ideas about how to reorganize the American project. I think he wanted to align with Pan-Arabism and compete with the USSR for that realm, and instead Israel worked with the Cuban mafia and a few other ex-military and intelligence guys, maybe the Bush family, and they offed him.
Yeah, he wanted to print his own money as well. He did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Joaquin, I'm gonna sign off.
Great.
Thank you so much.
I'll see you.
Okay.
Bye.